Thanks for downloading this episode of the Resilient Advisor Podcast. My name is Jay Coulter, and joining me for this episode is David Snider, who is the CEO of the fintech company Harness Wealth. And we are going to discuss how financial advisors can differentiate themselves by integrating services and expanding their offerings. David, thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Excited to do it.
All right, so this is not a new topic, but I can tell our listeners that I know this conversation is going to provide extreme value because, David, you have a wealth of expertise in this space. So let's get started and go deep. Why are we seeing a trend towards advisors expanding their offerings? What's driving it?
I think number one is often people look to the highest end of the market for what they themselves want. And it was interesting seeing a few weeks ago on the cover of The Economist, the headline being about the rise of the family office. And even in that small niche, which has existed for a long time, 2/3 of the family offices The Economist found all were created after 2000. And the approach that they've often taken, in part designed by the client, whether that's a family or multiple families, is a desire for that integrated CFO, chief of staff of the family financially that can do a bunch of different things and pull them together. And so I think the existence of that and the proliferation to some degree at the highest end has led more people sort of in the tier down and 2 tiers down to say, hey, there could be more, and I want sort of that simplification, especially as some of the alpha that exists these days is driven as much by tax and legal structures as it is by investment outperformance of the market.
Without a doubt. Taxes can add more alpha than any investment manager can. So let's put some dollars on this. What do you consider a family office in terms of assets under management? Is there a general benchmark in the industry?
In general, what I've heard is that below $100 million of assets, it tends not to make sense. Many of these that I've spoken to are spending $500,000, $1 million in technology, another $500,000 to $1 million in staff costs. And so when you think about fees in our industry, and presumably as you get higher, you want to be even more fee conscious as a percent of assets, 2% is expensive at $100 million. So it really is kind of that level and above. Mm-hmm. But more and more private banks and sophisticated advisors are trying to replicate that experience, but at different levels of assets for their clients.
Got it. And so when you look at multifamily offices, are you generally looking at the same combined benchmarks?
Yeah, they run the gamut. What was referenced in that Economist article, which I've actually heard from several heads of family offices, including a few of the biggest in the country, like the Walton family's offices. If you've spoken to one family office, you've spoken to one family office, that there really is no consistency. But I think whether it's multifamily or single family, $100 million tends to be the real minimum, unless it's just a family member kind of making some direct investments and it's part of a broader strategy.
If you've spoken to one family office, you've spoken to one family office. I love it. And that explains why it's such a confusing concept to a financial advisor listening to this podcast. And there's then opportunity for the advisors who want to integrate the same types of services that they offer. So what's driving the end consumer interest in these family offices?
So I think it's as much the allure of, what are the wealthiest people doing? Because, gosh, it seems like the wealthier are getting wealthier, and how do I make sure I'm not missing opportunity? We ran a survey back in June at Harness Wealth of about 550 affluent, mass affluent households, and found that 82% of respondents indicated that in their own advisor selection, the types of services offered was one of the most important criterion in that selection. And so I think that has compelled a lot of advisors to think about how to go beyond just offering financial planning or investment management.
So most financial advisors, probably the folks listening to this podcast, grew up in a world where they were probably at a broker-dealer, where they were explicitly told they could not talk about taxes or give tax advice on any type of granular level, and forget about any type of legal advice. But today, with the shift to independence, with the shift to the RIA space, this is where the opportunity presents itself. But most advisors don't have any experience in that space, and there's obviously dogma associated with it. What do advisors need to consider in terms of a framework as it relates to integrating tax and legal services?
Ultimately, what we found, and this is part of the model with Harness Wealth as well, is that it's not that a client needs for the same person to provide those services. It's just the feeling that there is an integration relationship between all of them. And so if you're a financial advisor with really deep expertise that doesn't extend it into tax, it doesn't mean you should go out, and try to become a CPA, but partnering with several that you think are providing great services and then having that constant touch point to them about specific clients to ensure that from a client perspective, they feel that sense of coordination, integration. That can be just as valuable, if not more valuable, than just trying to do everything oneself.
So at Harness Wealth, how do you guys help the advisors encapsulate that experience for the client?
So we ultimately, in some ways, are trying to create that family office experience for a mass affluent client where, depending on what their needs may be, we can help sort of identify across financial, tax, and legal from a technology standpoint where opportunities exist, connect them to advisors that in some cases are just focused on one vertical. In some cases may actually be helpful to them in financial and tax is where we see the most overlap of some firms doing both for their clients. Mm-hmm. But it allows advisors, again, to focus on one vertical and have that partner to be able to holistically have that integrated offering, so that they don't have to themselves necessarily do everything, but can give clients that experience.
So that's a great segue into a conversation we had before this call about client loyalty and a framework that you look at. Could you walk listeners through the framework that you use for delivering client or creating an experience that creates client loyalty and how this could play into it?
So one of the things that I saw at both Bain & Company, the consulting firm, as well as Bain Capital, where I worked on the private equity side, was companies tend to drive the most loyalty, which tends to be the best proxy for willingness to pay, as well as likelihood to refer others or be promoters of a given service, is either one, technology that is easy to use or delights people, or two, service that exceeds expectations. And most companies really are just focused on one or the other. They want to make sure they're not doing a terrible job at the other because both are important. But you can be Apple and just have phenomenal technology products and drive value and excitement that way. Or you can be a company like First Republic where it really leads with service and has some technology to provide that functionality, but it's the service that differentiates. And so for businesses that we work with, or that Bain has looked at, et cetera, those are often important attributes to identify. And I think that translates nicely to the advisor market, where if technology is not your core competence, really exceed expectations on service. And we hope to help advisors actually be able to do a little bit of both through a partnership.
Gotcha. So how do you do that from the technology standpoint and helping them with the exceptional service component?
So again, I think for advisors listening that, putting Harness Wealth aside, really making sure that what you're doing feels integrated in terms of client's experience. And so unless you believe that you're going to consistently outperform the market, which is harder and harder to do and harder to sell, you really want to be doing more than what they feel like they can get from anywhere else. And so one of those ways is really thoughtful financial planning, that being tied perhaps to at least a connected offering of these other services like tax and legal, or just being a great resource to someone when different challenges pop up there in some way or shape or form connected to their own balance sheet. The way that we work, and some of this is informed by my experience at Compass, where I was for half a decade, where we were a tech-enabled platform for real estate agents, is really helping to create that front-end technology experience where people feel like there is an ease of use, an understanding and ability to navigate without any sales pressure, but that is connected to a best-in-class service experience, which is delivered through the advisors that we have vetted and work with, not by Harness Wealth employees.
Do you think that model applies to the older generation as well as, I mean, there's been plenty written about the millennials needing tech-friendly service. I think I'm a Gen Xer at 45 years old, but the folks that are, 60 to 70 that are in the process of, distributing their assets, living off of them, do they need that same type of experience? I'm sorry.
Well,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do they expect that same type of service?
There are definitely different categories of tech expectation, certainly among the baby boomer and silent generation of those that are 70 and addicted to their iPhone, and others that don't even have a computer, at the office if they still maintain one. Ultimately, though, I think for advisors thinking about the future of their business and client development, those that are likely to be the most attractive clients and the ones that will be with an advisor for the next 20 years have grown up in an environment where they have and use daily technology as a core part of both their personal life and their professional one. And so being able to deliver an experience that feels like it is on par or ahead of their experiences in other verticals, we think is really important, especially going forward.
Got it. Makes sense. So it's funny, you talk about the 70-year-old that's addicted to their iPhone, and then, of course, the clients that don't have anything. When I work with advisors, there are times where we're talking about a client communication plan, a touch point system, and they'll say, well, this particular client doesn't even have an email address. And what we have found is that if they ask them if they do, they're just living in the dogma of the fact that they asked that question 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And it turns out not only do they have email addresses, they have an iPad, they're leveraging technology because that older generation has started to adopt these technologies, especially once they get into retirement and have more time. So it's important for the advisors to have that presence there and communicate with them. So last question. We had a really, really, really great conversation about how you at Harness Wealth vet financial advisors. And the financial advisor vetting process is incredibly thorough. And what I think listeners could glean from that is where they could find opportunities for improvement in their own practice. David, walk us through the process of being vetted as a financial advisor on the Harness Wealth platform.
So initially, my background is a little bit in financial services, some in technology, and so relied on some of the members of our advisory council to come up with these attributes, and that group includes the former head of the IRS, a woman who ran 2 of the 4 largest U.S. Retirement investment platforms, and we really wanted to span the spectrum of things that impact the alignment between advisor, client, and the way that fees or dollars are generated or deployed, the attributes in terms of how well functioning the operational side of a business is, as well as attributes that are different among even those that we consider best in class across kind of those gating items of being part of the platform that help us to differentiate of Harness Wealth clients, which are the right ones to pair with specific advisors. And so there are, I think, 100 different attributes that we try to understand from the advisors that reach out to us or that we've identified and reach out to in that process.
100 attributes. Could you give us a sampling of what you look for?
Sure. So a number of those attributes relate to the specific advisor, what certifications they have, are they thought leaders or writing about anything that really demonstrate a specific area of expertise or thoughtfulness. How many different people are part of the practice? What's the differentiation? Is it a specific advisor that really is the only point of contact, or is there more of a team approach? What is the composition, if any, of the operational support that helps enable the advisor to do more, to deliver a better client experience? What is the communication preferences, options, essentially, for the firm? Are they leveraging whatever medium of communication the clients want, or is it only by phone or in person? Really, again, runs the gamut of different things that we believe are important to that ideal match between client and advisor.
Yeah, I got to tell you, it sounds like you're looking for advisors that are really buttoned up from the service standpoint. I mean, because you are eating your own cooking. You want to make sure they have the technology in place. You want to make sure that they have a platform for delivering that exceptional service. And so if an advisor wanted to see if they would qualify for what you guys offer, what would the process look like, and how could they go about getting in touch with you?
So they should visit our website, kind of understand a little bit more about what we do at harnesswealth.com. And then there's a email address on the site that any advisors that are interested in participating can click and send us a note. And we follow up with every advisor that has that interest. And for some that aren't a fit because of one attribute, we'll typically just communicate, why that is. And for those that are a great fit, we're constantly looking forward to expanding the offering and being able to focus more and more narrowly the right advisor set for clients that are part of our platform.
So it could actually be a pretty good benchmarking exercise for an advisor to figure out where they might have some deficiencies in their practice by going through this 100 attribute test that's put together by that high-level counsel. Is that fair?
We would welcome that, certainly.
That's great. And so we also have a handful of consumers that listen to this podcast. For a consumer, and this would be great edification for advisors, what would their experience be if they went through the Harness Wealth process? So
there are two distinct consumer journeys that we've built. The first is someone who knows that they are looking for an advisor. Either they've outgrown or been dissatisfied with an existing advisor, or they've been doing something themselves, and because of more complexity, more assets, or other factors, know that they need someone, and we help them understand what they're looking for and go through that process. The other, which we call the impact planning, is for someone who knows that there is more they could be doing, but not even sure what those areas are. And so we'll take someone through a process really informed both by our advisors as well as the advisor process that we worked with advisors and what they often do in person, to come up with an integrated platform. What are your goals? What are your concerns? What are products you're already invested in or thinking about, tax, legal, as well as financial? And then through that process, we'll identify here are the opportunities that we see, some of these that an individual can tackle themselves, and some that we think it makes sense to engage with an advisor to complete. And so either of those experiences we think can add a lot of value to a client.
Without a doubt. David, you guys are doing some exciting things. Listeners, check out harnesswealth.com. And David, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thanks very much, Jay.